All right, we'll call the meeting to order. Apologize for a typo. I had it being called to order by our vice chair, and that's not needed. Any additions or deletions for the agenda? Hearing none, move on to the approval of minutes from the 18th. Is there someone willing to make that motion? Made by Loretta,
I'll second.
second by Jason. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the minutes, say aye. Or raise a hand. Opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? All right, we passed the minutes. This was an open loop from our last meeting discussing FTO. What I'll do is I'll pull up the draft because it's built right into that. So is this big enough? So we established level 1 at 60 hours for FTO. The discussion was around level 2 going to 120 hours. I've since had a chance to talk to the sheriffs, and generally they're supportive of 120 hours for the ones I get responses of. Is there further discussion or thoughts people had in the last week?
No discussion on our end, Mark.
Is there someone willing to make a motion?
I'll move that we recommend establishing level 2 FTO training at 120 hours.
Is there a second? All right. Moved by Jason, second by Trevor. Any further discussion on FTO? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye or raise a hand.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. All right, clear that one out. Oops. So I hope everybody saw the draft report that I'm sharing. I'm not married to any of this. I just tried to reduce to writing everything we've talked about in the format of recommendations that we can make as a committee to the council. If there's any changes, things I wrote poorly, by no means will I be offended. Any general comments before we go through it? All right, so proposal 1 is broadly establishing the joint academy for level, oh, I'm sorry, Dominica?
Yeah, I didn't know, I mean, do you think it needs to be made clear that this is just the proposal for right now, that there are further coming or possibly more in that first paragraph?
We can certainly add something to it. I don't think that we are handcuffed, pun intended, to just making one proposal. And the only thought I have counter to that is I don't want to necessarily say that there is more work to be done, that we can't really speak to what the work is. We're going to continue working as a group. I just don't know what to promise.
Maybe the immediate recommendations, like, so it seems like there is something that's possible in the future, just some kind of, and if not, that's the thing, it just struck me as maybe we should put something signaling that.
Okay. Thank you, Dominica. So first one is to essentially establish the level 1-2 joint academy. Attachment A would be the calendar created. I think it was created by Ken. Any issues with this section? And are we good with just going through this as a whole and then voting on it as a full slab of proposals? Chris, if you're talking, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry, Mark, I was a little confused when I first read this, when it kept making reference to attachments, and although I understand what you were saying and what you just said now, do you have those attachments of that schedule so that folks could look at that when you're referencing it?
I do. And just for the sake of this, because some of them are PDFs for me, so I couldn't write attachment on it, but let's see. So this is the week 1. This is week 2. And then for the level 2 track only, this is week 3. Loretta, if you're talking to us, you're muted. Any issues with attachment A? Okay.
Sheriff, did you have any more thought? I apologize for interrupting, but any more thought about the report writing that we briefly discussed last week?
We will be coming up on that.
Got it.
And so I
Thanks.
broke each of these proposals out kind of as like its own modular building block, which I think was consistent with it, but it seemed to make sense, at least in my mind, to do it this way. And if people feel there's a different way, then we can certainly talk about that too. So first off, we're establishing the joint academy. And so this is a level 1, level 2 academy. The second one is adopting the academy schedule, which is also the same document you just looked at. But this basically goes on to explain in an itemized list what we're deleting. And we can speak to, I just didn't capture in writing, but I wasn't able to speak intelligently about why criminal law was reducing from 12 to 8 hours. It just, that was reflected in the schedule, and I'm sure that makes sense to academy staff, and I'm fine with it. I just can't speak intelligently to what that change was. Ken, do you know?
Yeah, that was a look at what the current level 2 and level 1 scope might look like in terms of the enforcement of criminal law from those perspectives and what's reasonable and what's not. Taking a look at the felony versus misdemeanor, I think we all recognize that folks need to be aware of what those felony charges might look like or what they might be. But obviously, per scope of practice, we want to make sure they're more fully versed in whatever scope or certification level they're going to be training to.
Great. Any questions or comments about that? Hear none. Number 2 is we delete the 4 hours of basic handcuffing techniques as it's incorporated in the 3 days of use of force training now, so it was just duplicative. I want to be clear, we're deleting these from phase 1. It's not to say we're deleting the training. Number 3 is delete 4 hours of juvenile law. And then number 4 was delete 4 hours of report writing. Any questions about those? Or concerns?
One question for me, Mark, and this is really more probably directed for Ken. When I'm looking at the attachment on the 3-week schedule, where is the additional 4-hour block of criminal law fitting in?
It's a reduction, sir. So it's actually removing from the original schedule of 12 hours of criminal law to 8 hours of criminal law.
Okay, read it wrong. Sorry, my fault.
All right, second up is expansions. And I'm not sure if people feel preference on the deletions being said first or being said second. Not sure it matters, but I'll just call it out. That was a question in my mind. So we're adding 24 hours of defensive tactics. This was a phase 2 course that we're now moving into phase 1. For the level 2 third week, we're adding 8 hours of mental health crisis training, 8 hours domestic violence training, 8 hours of practicals, and then 8 hours of graded scenarios. Excuse me. Any questions about that?
Sheriff, I think on that, the last one of the graded scenarios for level 2 only, that's only 4 hours on that Friday block,
Okay.
followed by the final exam and graduation.
All right. Any questions, comments, or concerns with this section or proposal? All right, hearing none, move on to the next one. So attachment B, which would, oh, Anthony?
I'm just curious, were the graded scenarios always part of level 2?
No.
Okay.
So this refers to attachment B, and in this case, I put level 2 first because it's the known level. Again, if it makes sense to order it in a different way to people, always open for feedback. So this would be attachment B, which is the core and elective courses. One thing, as I was writing this, I identified, and I thought the general consensus of the, oh, Loretta?
I'm just, could you just make that a little bit bigger for me?
Of course. Oops, I'm making teams bigger. My bad. Is that better? Hearing no comments, I'll assume it's better. Yeah. So as I was writing this, I recognized that we took report writing out of phase 1, and I thought that we were going to include it as part of phase 2. It was not included on the CEC form, and had a chat with Ken last week, and really, I think the decision point we came to is we weren't sure which direction to go, so we wanted to bring it to the group. I thought it's a valuable course to include, but it's a valuable course to include once people know what they're actually writing reports about. Jason, as an instructor of report writing, do you agree with that thought?
Yes, I do. I don't think I was totally happy, as everyone knows, with it being taken out of phase 1 because I think there's more important classes to teach, but I do think it should still be instructed. I like the idea of it being in phase 2 because it allows the officer to get some experience reading reports, gives some frame of reference. With these level 2 classes currently, we have people that have never read a police report, and we're speaking, there's a lot of theory. They don't have a basis of knowledge. So I do think it should be a phase 2 requirement. There is some standard writing, stylistic stuff, affidavit writing that I think should be covered. I think we'd be doing a disservice if we didn't teach it at all.
Loretta?
I think we should make that as one of our mandatory classes for the on the worksheet.
Dominica?
I agree. I think it should be something that's required. From an enforcement standpoint, it is always important to make sure that officers can communicate effectively their investigation, what they've seen, what they've heard from a number of different sources, and put it in a coherent way that could be useful to other people reading that report. And I do think that that's a skill that we should really embrace and put forth.
And Anthony.
Yeah, sorry to disagree with everyone. I just don't think it's necessary. I mean, the first couple of weeks of training, it's us kicking reports back, and no matter what was taught at the academy, because of the expectations that the department brings or what that particular supervisor brings. I think any level 1 or level 2, it's writing a report, it's going to go to a supervisor, and they're going to sit there with them and tailor it and keep tailoring it until they have a good product. So not that I don't think report writing is important, it certainly is, but I think that's something they're going to get at the agency.
Trevor?
And I'll throw my vote with the keep it in. Unfortunately, as I travel around the state, I do see agencies. I agree with Anthony that they should get it at the agency, but I fear that there are some agencies that may not give that level of attention. And certainly hearing from Dominica and realizing the importance from a risk management standpoint as well. Everything needs to be well documented. And frankly, I would prefer to see some level of standardization across the state through a concerted training effort by Academy certified instructors.
Anthony, is that an old hand? Okay. Any other thoughts or comments on report writing? Tom?
Yeah, I'll just say that I think part of what we're doing here is trying to establish a baseline and a basic training of sorts, and I think report writing is one of the critical components of that. So I would be in favor of keeping it in.
So generally here, yes, we want to keep report writing in phase 2. And so then I think where there is a discussion of disagreement is whether it's a mandatory or not mandatory class. I get the general sense that people are leaning towards mandatory. Do we want to formalize that with a vote, or do we just, Anthony, are you good with falling on your sword on that one?
Yeah, I'm good. Again, though, just to throw it out there, I see which way the team is going. My main concern is something that's going to get these liability issues that is going to get an agency, somebody hurt, an officer hurt. Report writing, yes, is a liability, but I think, again, there's a safeguard there. Yes, there's bad reports out there, and that's a reflection on the agency approving cases that they shouldn't be approving. There's a safeguard. A level 2 submits a report, it goes to a supervisor approves that. There's a liability for a level 2 being out there with a gun or being in a car, and I mean, there's just so many different things, but I just think report writing is one of those things where there is a safeguard. So just kind of want to throw that out. I'll end it there.
All right. Any other thoughts or comments on report writing?
I would just say that we're on the judicial side, and this is more a level 1 issue. We're going to have report writing as a required element, and that may be a judicial issue in coordination or something that we replicate from academy training.
All right. And then since we missed report writing when I was going through this, is there any other mandatory or elective courses that you don't see in the CEC2? We'll start with mandatory first. That should be here.
Is it a safe presumption with first aid that STB is an element of that?
What's STB?
Stop the bleed, tourniquet?
I defer to Academy staff.
No, it is not, and it has not traditionally been part of the American Red Cross First Aid CPR certification block. For level 3, we do that. We do a casualty care 8-hour block or 8-hour day to include scenario-based training. That is not what's included in the level 1 or level 2 proposal.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I do know that TCCC training has been a leading course of study. A lot of agencies are turning to as a step past Stop the Bleed. Anything on required courses, Jason?
I'm sorry, I should know this, but I don't know this. Is active shooter at all a part of level 2, phase 1, phase 2?
It is not.
Okay, thinking about modern times, I'm thinking of active shooter response because we utilize level 2 in this state. And if there's an active shooter scenario and there's a level 2 officer reasonably nearby on duty, I would assume they are going to go. And I think they should be trained.
Dominica?
Is there anything that addresses like officer wellness or anything like that in level 1 or 2?
Not that I'm aware of. That's usually delivered through agencies and in-service trainings throughout the year.
Is it mandatory or no, it's up to the agency?
Up to the agency.
Is that something we would want to consider making mandatory?
What's the group think?
I think there's merit to it, given that we know that a lot of the level 2 folks are working full-time hours. It's not the just weekend hours that it started as. Level 3 certainly gets lots of wellness training.
Anthony?
I'm gonna go no on that as a not necessary.
Yeah, I'm kind of siding with you, Anthony, not because I don't value the training. I think that there's a wide body of it out there, and agency heads are already recognizing the value of wellness training for their agencies. We have the annual wellness conference. Trevor, were you involved with that? See, he's off screen, so maybe he had to step away for a minute. Jason?
So just as an observation, herein lies the problem, and where we always end up is we start comparing level 2 to level 3, and we end up wanting them to have the same training as level 3, but there's no way to do that without making them go through the level 3 class. This came up with the TAC years ago, this same exact issue, because you look at all these trainings and say, well, this is very important, active shooter wellness, but if they're doing the same job, shouldn't they have the same training? And we just end up circling right back to where we are now.
I think the argument would be because the scope of practice limits the same job, then that's where the delineation of level 2 and level 3 comes down to. Trevor, I think you were trying to say something.
I couldn't unmute. Yeah, as far as your wellness question, there has been an annual wellness conference. I think they're not a guarantee as to what the focus will be. The first year was more directed to policy. The last 2 years, it was the commission kind of teamed up with the Institute out of Castleton. So it was kind of a practitioner-based conference helping first responders to help and find help. That's not to say what it will be in future years. I understand what Dominica is saying, and I think it's important, but I more come back to Jason, and that is that we struggle here where we've got officers, yeah, it's a different scope of practice, but I don't know that it's a whole lot different in response strategy. In follow through, yes, when it comes to felonies, but in response, a level 2 could be walking into the same mess a level 3 could. And that's where I struggle with, this isn't my formal position. My personal position is, we're partially training people to go out there and do a job that I'm not sure they're really ready to do. But we're in this catch-22 where Vermont needs officers. They can't commit to a 16, 17, 18-week program. And how do we thread that needle? So back to wellness. I'm not sure it has to be mandatory because I think we have limited capacity. I do cover very briefly, probably 10 minutes, in police liability because I think your physical mental mindset does attach to liability to some degree. So I have a couple slides. We go over the below 100. I talk about diet, talk about mental wellness. Again, out of a 4-hour block, it's probably 10 or 15 minutes, but there's at least a quick introduction.
Maybe, sorry to cut in here, Anthony. Maybe that's an opportunity, kind of like the fair and impartial policing we've talked about. Should that be a standalone course, or should that be a concept intertwined into all of our curriculums? I think wellness has to be intertwined into curriculums. The feedback I've gotten from officers with wellness courses has been they value it, and at the same time, they didn't feel the courses that I've heard, this is just anecdotal, they didn't find value in the 4 hours or whatever the training was. They'd rather see it built into mindsets of different curriculums they have. Anthony.
Yeah, I just think, I mean, ultimately, I'd like to see as much training as possible for every level, including level 3. But we're dealing with what we have, and sometimes it's you're trying to fit 4 cars in a 2-car garage. So I just look at it as what is the if I'm gonna, I'd rather have an extra 4 hours of active shooter or firearms or any of the other things that I have major concerns that a level 2 doesn't have enough of, versus something that an agency can say, hey, we're going to send you to this, or hey, we think it's important, or even considering the fact that a level 2 usually, and I know every agency is a little different, but for the most part, the intention is not that they're working these 40-hour weeks and they don't have an opportunity to cut on hours. I know there's exceptions, but so that was it.
Dominica?
I'm totally hearing everyone. My thought is, when we were talking about, and I don't know a lot about the field training officers and those kinds of things, is wellness part of that expectation?
Dan, you want to speak to the field training research and the wellness training that you gave?
Who was that for, Sheriff? I didn't hear it.
Dan Pennington, if you can.
So I can briefly, as part of the FTO process, both the core and electives, if a department doesn't require it as part of the elective policy or program for that individual department, the standards checklist, which is a 19-page task list of items that are supposed to be either performed, discussed, or in scenario-based training gone over with the candidate prior to certification. Typically, that would include agency policies as well as agency culture. And if it's something that's already codified within that agency, that would be the time that it would be presented to the new recruit.
Loretta?
I think some of it, I think we're overthinking. I mean, because obviously we know the 2-3 weeks program in the FTO is just the tip of the iceberg. We continue to train throughout our career. And some of these classes, I mean, like the active shooter, I make sure all my people go through an active shooter course, regardless of whether it's mandatory or not. It's important. But I think, we can, yes, it should be mandatory. I agree. It hasn't been. So we get it in a different way. I think we have to also look at things that we can do as continuing training, not just for the few little bit of time we have in the for this program.
And I can also say we don't necessarily need to solve these problems right now because we're continuing to do more work. So, I mean, I think this is good discussion where we might say maybe this is work for our next tranche. Anything else in the required list aside from report writing, which we're adding, that we missed?
And Sheriff, this is the level 2 list that you're looking at,
Correct.
Just so everybody's tracking with that.
All right, we'll move on to elective courses. In light of the conversation we had, just calling it out the importance that's been mentioned, and not to say we've made a decision one way or the other, do we want to add active shooter and wellness training to the elective list? See a bunch of blank stares.
Yes, I would agree to that. I would also agree maybe adding some de-escalation training to our elective courses.
I'll defer to academy staff. De-escalation, that is part of the use of force curriculum. Is that accurate?
It is incorporated within use of force, both non-lethal and deadly force, but it's not the standalone de-escalation training that I think most agencies are probably looking for their folks to come through, and it's not the level 3. And there's also, just so the group is aware, anything that's not covered in the elective phase 2, obviously an agency or agency specific can add that to the other courses below as part of their elective process. So if it's not listed on there, we could certainly swap things out or add, or however the group would like us to do that.
Thanks, Ken. Do we even have LPRs in the state right now?
When you say we, Sheriff,
Is there an agency that's able to function an LPR in the state right now?
I think all of the DMV units have now been deactivated, and I think they may have been the last group to actually have them still attached to their trucks. I think they had an increased timeline with which to deactivate those based on their commercial motor vehicle enforcement bylaws. But I think since then they've all been deactivated.
Mine are in the garage.
And did that law sunset?
That I don't know.
I think it was sunsetting either this year or last year, summer soon. So it might make sense for us to include LPR training if it did in fact sunset, but don't quote me on that. And then another question I have, and this might be a statutory requirement. Level 2s are limited in scope on sex assault investigations by statute. The council can, and so DUI is an example of this, the council can provide specialized training that allows for them to engage or expand their scope of authority, if I understand correctly. Is that the intention of sex assault investigation as a level 2 elective?
My answer would be no to that. You are correct, it is statutory that is in there, and that has been, I think, widely used in the DUI enforcement, which is not a mandatory certification, but most agencies utilize, as most officers do. I think, well, I'll leave the conversation up to this group, but I see Domenica's hand up.
Domenica?
I was just wondering, is that more like a scene preservation or some kind of identifying things of, you know, what not to do in sexual assault investigations in terms of preliminary interviews or those kinds of things? How is this conceptualized in level 2 training?
Anthony or Jason, are you prepared to answer that? Or should we defer to Academy staff first?
Academy staff.
Chris,
I think
Ken?
Domenica, it's easy to say that at any level 1 or 2 can actually, or not level 1 because it doesn't exist yet, but can respond to anything, freeze a scene, and actually secure a scene until such time as a level 3 officer can arrive on scene and then take control over that. So it's not that a felony has to be completely ignored. It's just that they have the limited ability to freeze that scene and make sure that somebody gets to that scene to take over that before, if it's outside of their scope of practice.
Domenica, I assume that's a follow-up.
Yeah, that makes sense. I would say the sexual assault investigations are the most vulnerable to those kinds of first response later on in, you know, in court, and certainly with survivors and how they experience the entire kind of law enforcement experience as well as the judicial one. So that sounds, you know, that's what I thought it would be.
Anthony?
Yeah, OC as an elective. Shouldn't that be into the main meat of what we're doing?
I think the explanation or justification there would be the person would not possess OC unless they were certified on it. So then it's an agency determination of do they need that versus a taser versus something else.
Again, though, I mean, that's going to be the most basic thing that I think, me personally, I think every officer, no matter what the level, would and should have on them. That almost seems like it should be mandatory that we're not giving an agency the ability to not carry it.
I think that was in an effort to increase the hours of use of force training that currently existed in level 2, but not increased it to the full week long, which would have included both OC certification as well. So that this was a way to tailor agency specific for those that have that necessary need to have their officers certified. It doesn't have to be at the academy. That can be done offsite. So that's something that an agency could choose to do if they chose to do so afterwards, but it was providing more use of force training, but not an entire week where it was increasing the amount of time.
I think it's also been historically one of those options that has been out there, and dependent on what the level 2 officer was going to be doing for their own agency scope of practice, dictated whether or not the agency wanted them to have OC or not, or if it was something that was not going to be necessary as part of their responsibility. Therefore, why send somebody through OC training if they weren't going to be carrying it on the job?
Other thoughts? All right, for sake of time. So do we want to add elective courses for active shooter and wellness? Let's do active shooter first. Good with that? See head nod from Jason, thumb from Loretta. Dominica?
Good with that.
Anyone not good with that? And as Ken previously said, it's not to say just because it's not on the list, it's excluded as training. These are recommendations, not us. All right, talking about phase one. So this is being invented. Let's see. So this is the CEC one. So another question that I had, and I think this is based on, the question I had is that we have EVOC that's included in Friday training. And then we have Academy approved curriculum, or VCJC approved curriculum for EVOC as one of the required phase two courses. I wasn't sure if that was a typo, an oversight, or intentional, so I called Ken and said, what are we talking about? And we said we need to have a discussion. Ken, did I sum that up well?
Sure, we'll go with that.
So do you want to present what EVOC on phase two is in your mind as the EVOC instructor?
So, yeah, let's break it down even further. My original thought was that during phase one of the in-residence portion, they would all get the defensive driving classroom portion and pursuit policy portion that we teach, again, strictly in the classroom. The phase two required would be the actual hands-on, and then the remainder of the classroom block instruction that we don't cover during that initial 4 hours.
And how long would the EVOC course be?
So total of 20 hours of hands-on, 12 hours of classroom.
And is that 12 hours of classroom part of the phase two requirement?
I believe that's down to 8 hours of classroom.
So
We will
one
have
day,
covered part of it.
one
I'm
day
sorry, we will have
classroom.
covered part of that already.
And then 3 days driving?
So my plan is to have 4 days total, where we start in the classroom and then we go out to driving. It also depends on what we create for a schedule for firearms. If it's possible to replicate what we're doing currently for week 9, where we have half the class driving and half the class at the range, to continue to do that, so that we're only asking instructors to be here for a single week, that might be beneficial.
So I'll say my thought with this is that I don't think it should be a required course for level one. Not to say it should not be accessible to level one, but I would propose moving this to elective. The primary reason is the scope of authority of level ones generally are not driving in emergency modes. They're not responders in the general context that level 2 or level 3 would be. And the scope of authority, I just think it's committing training resources to something where an agency can send a person to EVOC training if they recognize that the agency is going to need it. But at the end of the day, their scope of authority really limits them on it. If I were to employ level 1 officers, they probably wouldn't even have issued cruisers. The times that they're driving cruisers are generally normal driving situations. But that's just my thought. Anthony.
I agree. Level 1 should be an elective, if anything.
See a head nod from Loretta. Any dissension with my proposal? Trevor, from a risk management side, does that seem reasonable? Not to say you're speaking for the league, but you have that lens.
Yeah, I don't have a disagreement with that.
And Dominica, how do you feel about that? Maybe speaking for the AG's office or not?
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Sheriff, would that then remove from the required phase 2 courses EVOC as well?
For level one, yes.
for level one?
So
Okay.
move that to elective. And then do you want to repeat the same discussion for report writing here, or just say it should be a mandatory course? I think we already heard from Rob that if it were not a mandatory course, it would be included in the court security training anyways. And I still think that report writing is necessary, even if it's going to be different types of reports. And it's certainly been a training area that we've identified, or I've heard from numerous people across the state, is weaker with current generations coming into training. We all good with making report writing mandatory?
Yes.
All right. And then elective. See anything you want to include on elective that we'll call out?
So Sheriff will add the EVOC to the elective for phase 2. And then add report writing to the required.
Yes.
Got it. Thank you.
Any others?
I may have missed it. Do we have de-escalation in there as an elective course, or is that part of use of force earlier that level 1 would see?
The answer was it's part of level 1, but it's not the same de-escalation course that it's not the full de-escalation course taught in level 3, which is what, Ken, 4 hours, 8 hours?
4. It will be 8. TC Marvin will be the lead instructor for that, and he is working through IACP for that curriculum right now.
Dominica?
We want to add wellness as an elective here too.
Sure. Do we want to add it, active shooter as well for level 1?
I think we just need to be cognizant that the level 1 folks aren't getting the same firearms handling, training, and experience prior to going into alert training. So we just need to, I think, make sure that we're still okay with whoever's instructing either the alert or whatever the agency wants their officers to have for active shooter training. May not all be the same page.
Can I take heed the cautionary tale? Is it wise for us to include active shooter or leave it out for now? And if agencies sought it, certainly that's their prerogative, and we can talk with instructors about whether that's an appropriate phase 2 course.
I think you're on the right track. If at least we have it as a suggested elective course, then hopefully that will encourage agencies to provide that training to those folks. Whether it's courthouse or on the road or whatever else it might be, I think when the call goes out for everybody to respond to something.
Jason?
Some of this gets complex for me because without knowing what each level 1 might be expected to do, I'm just thinking out loud. For example, if an agency is never going to have their level 1 go to an active shooter, then they don't need the training. But if there's a chance that level 1 is going to go, then they should have the training. Same thing with EVOC. If there's any chance you're going to do emergency driving, you should have the EVOC training. If not, then no. But that's where I think this gets complex. Just my thought.
Chris?
Yeah, this also becomes complex, and I hope that this committee really thinks about this from this process, because level 1 is being newly created. So this scope of practice is going to make sure that agency heads are going to make sure that their officer is not moving beyond that scope of practice and get them into an Act 56 violation, and or they're doing something beyond what we're trying to tailor this level 1 certification piece for. So to Jason's points, if we're going to only give them, we're not going to give them EVOC training, then when they're doing a vehicle escort, and some other thing happens where there's a pursuit ongoing, they're going to know that they are not able to participate in that. They're not going to have any part in that. We just don't want them veering from what we're trying to create for a level of certification for them.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say with vehicle escorts or traffic control, traffic direction, those things, the agency has liability when they do deviate from the assigned thing. They are responsible for those functions. And so that's, speaking for my agency, that's actually part of our discussion with them of when they're assigned to this, they're not the first responder to the emergency that unfolded unexpectedly. Anthony? I'm sorry, Dominica?
Sorry, again, it's probably just a little bit of my ignorance on how active shooter is taught. Court personnel could possibly be in an active shooter situation within a courthouse or within that. I
Correct.
mean, so they may be affected by it, much like schools are targets for those kinds of things. They may be the ones unexpectedly responding because they're involved in it. Is there some kind of training that can be more in that vein of how to handle that response with the tools that they have and the responsibilities that they have versus maybe something that is more complex with responding to it with weapons and other kinds of tactical things? And it might be that way now. I'm just kind of throwing that out there.
I think my short answer would be yes, but Rob might be the better person to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly plausible because either there's guns in the building with law enforcement and it's, seized, or something gets through. So that's a training we do within the courts sporadically around the state as it is. So we need to have some element of guidance for that, probably in after the, initial phase 1 training. Could be
Anthony?
a specialty course.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Anthony?
Yeah, I don't think, I just feel like there's certain things that a level 1 there's going to be certain expectations that the agency sets. And it's one thing if there's an active shooter in the building, but I think leaving the building and going to help out with an active shooter situation wouldn't be ideal. I think part of the biggest problem going back is going to be differentiating again who's what and what their scope is, and having them understand you just because this officer can do this because they're level 2 or level 3, please understand that you can't do this, and having the 2s and 3s understand that as well. So I really think it's going to be put on the agency to say, okay, you're in the court, you don't have a car, you're not going emergency, you can't drive. I really think the agencies are going to have to be held responsible for making sure those officers stick to that scope of practice.
So I think broadly we're good with adding wellness. I'm not confident I understand where we're at on active shooter for level 1s.
I thought what I heard was you were going to add that to an elective courses.
I'm fine with that if that's the consensus. I just wasn't sure if it was consensus or not because it started making things a little more complex. I see head nods, so I'm going to go with consensus is we include active shooter as an elective. Cool. All right.
And wellness, right, Mark?
Yes. So we're cutting EVOC as a required course. That becomes an elective. We're requiring report writing. Okay, we've already done this. Chris and or Ken, does this language satisfy what you feel we need to say give the academy money to do the training?
That will certainly help.
Yeah, Sheriff, that's great.
So the follow-up question I have with this, because we haven't been delivering in service EVOC, as I understand it, what happens when we mandate that EVOC is performed and we don't get the resources? Not that we've ever seen that happen.
So I've been loaned a couple Crown Vics from a couple agencies, and I do have duct tape, so we can make something work.
Cool.
Somewhere Dan Pennington just got a shiver up his spine, wondering how he's going to provide that training. This makes me happy.
All right, so that is everything in this initial work, aside from what I'll call some simple sentences, but not really policy statements. Are we good with this draft as will soon be amended once I add the date and add a sentence about future work? And are we comfortable voting on this now, understanding I will make edits, but consistent with the comments that have been made so far? See some head nods. Is there someone willing to offer a motion that we make these recommendations to the council?
So moved.
Second by Loretta. Any further discussion?
I think,
Hearing none.
Mark, from my point, I think we just need to make sure that we move forward with what the curriculum looks like from the judiciary, and that we start to be able to have a look at that so we can compare whether that's something that we can have the judiciary come in as instructors and teach that during this, or whether that's something that we can find instructors to do here as well. So it's good conversation between perhaps Ken and Rob, or if Rob can send us what that actually looks like.
Yeah, and I know that I'm working with DMV on escorts. We did that work before with DMV, and so we're building that out. I guess there is another question that I have. Traffic control is currently a required phase 2, and I understand to the scope of authority, we want to train to what the statute says we should do. So I understand why it's a required course. What's that course? We do it primarily on-job training. So I wasn't sure if it should live as a phase 2 or a phase 3 training item, because I'm trying to think what the classroom would be. Put on your traffic vest and don't get run over. Tell cars to do smart things. I mean, I'm trying to figure out what that course would be, or if it is even like an online course, which I'm sure exists.
I think, Mark, one of those things that, like, for traffic control, it's equally as important to make sure that during that training that folks know what they can't do, right, within traffic control. As I'm sure that all of you law enforcement folks out there know, when you see non-law enforcement traffic control, and they call you because of someone's violation or action that they've tried to take that someone doesn't pay attention to them. I just want to make sure that we're covering those things as well.
Sure. So there's a motion on the table to adopt this work as written. I kind of threw a monkey wrench there, but we don't have to deal with that right now. We want to continue discussion or vote? I know we're a minute over. Seeing no
Let's
comments,
vote.
we'll call the question. All in favor of adopting the proposals, say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. And we have made our recommendations. So Chris, we'll get that sent over to you as a formal document. I'll include the attachments as referenced. Any public comment? Hearing none, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Loretta, second by Jason. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Everyone wants to
Aye.
stick around? Too bad. We're adjourned. Thank you for your work, everyone, and thoughtful
Happy
discussion.
Thanksgiving, everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Be safe out there.
Take care.
Absolutely. Take care,
Thanks.
everyone.